So in this video, CSS2, we're going to take a look at using external style sheets. External style sheets are probably what you want to use if you have very many pages on your site at all. It makes it very easy to maintain and make changes and those kinds of things. So if we're looking at an external style sheet, the first thing we need to do is from our HTML page, we need to link to it. So here in the head of the HTML page, we'll have a link, and notice the link is an empty tag. It's got the /close right there at the end. The type is a style sheet, text CSS, and the location of the style sheet, so name.css. The extension is .css. So once we have the link in our HTML, then we can open up our style sheet or create our style sheet. And it looks very much the way it did in the internal, where we were doing everything in the head. So here we have the body element. After the body element, then we open. We've got the different declarations here. Notice we've got the property we want to change, colon, and then the value, semicolon. So this is set up, and then we can close it. So we've done that for body. We can do it for div, paragraph, those kinds of things. And then during the parsing of the HTML, the browser will read down through. It will see that it needs to go back and do a second GET request for the style sheet. So it will go back and specifically request the style sheet. The server on the other side will send the style sheet down. And now the browser has more pieces of the information, more pieces of the puzzle that it can use to create the what's displayed on the screen. So it will combine the HTML with the CSS to make the page appear the way it should. Now, a couple of other things. So we've talked about just doing HTML elements. So here's one element. We can format the body, or we could format a div, or we can format a paragraph or an H1. We can also declare our very own special things, I guess for lack of a better word, that we can apply formatting to. And they're called classes or IDs. So we could talk about a CSS class or a CSS ID. If it's a CSS class, it starts with a period. If it's a CSS ID, it starts with a pound. They could be named anything that you want them to be named. They don't have to have an element's name. It can be any random thing that you want. Normally, you're going to name them so that they make sense to the page. So footer is obviously going to the footer of the page. Welcome header is obviously about the welcome piece of text that it's on the screen. Mike, who knows what we're doing with Mike here? It's a little too vague, so we might want to make that more specific. And here we have one named subheader that's being applied to the paragraphs. So when we're looking at classes, we're looking at formatting that will likely be used more than once on the page or throughout the site. So classes are to be reused. IDs are generally things that will only appear once or very infrequently on the web page. These things would be like the headers. We could have a specific class that did bold, italics, and underline, and then every time we wanted to bold, italic, or underline, we would call that class. So we might call it 10 times on the single page, but we would probably only have one welcome header. So realistically, footer could be changed over to become an ID as well. They function exactly the same. There's just that little, the usage there's just a little difference in the usage, but either one should work. So now that we've declared our special formatting, we've given our class a name or given our ID a name, then we can add our declarations behind it, what we want it to actually look like. Now it's time to actually apply that to the page. So if we go back to our HTML, we can see that for this H1 that says welcome, we want to apply the formatting found in welcome header. Welcome header had a pound sign. It was an ID. So right after we open and declare the H1 element, space, then we're going to do ID equals open quote. And then we can put in the actual ID that we want to call here. close quote, close up the H1 header, put the text in there, close up the H1 tag, and now welcome is going to have the formatting that we specified in the welcome header ID, which should be center alignment. That was the really thing that we did there. So let's take a look at our page. So notice we have what appears to be bold and italics coming from somewhere. We also have red that's coming from somewhere, and we have center. Center is coming from that ID, from the welcome header ID. The other properties are being inherited from somewhere. So if we go back and we look, H1 is font style italic and bold. So that's where the italic and bold is coming from. It's being inherited by the H1. The color red is coming from the body. So this is cascading. What we specify on the body, the general, is red. That's going to apply. Plus, we're going to add some specific things for the H1, which would be italic and bold. And then on top of that, we're going to apply some very specific formatting that we declare, which is to center it. So if we were to create a second H1 on this page, it should be red, bold, and italic, because it's getting the red from the body, inheriting that. It's getting the bold and italic from the H1 format, but it shouldn't be centered because we're not specifying it as an ID here. So let's save that, and we'll go in here and refresh. And it is. It's bold and italic and red. It's just not centered. So class was the other one that we could use, and here we've specified this last div has a class of footer. So this is our footer div, where we've got the copyright info and all that kind of stuff. And so if we look at it, it should be, it's centered, it's red, it's italic. If we look in our style sheet, footer, so whatever font size we've specified with body, we've overwritten it here to a 9 point. We've specified italic, we've specified center, we've given it a line height. So font size is how tall the actual letters are. Line height is how much spacing that you're going to allow. So we've got 3 extra points here. And then we'll get into some of this padding here in a little bit. But so this is using an external style sheet to format the page. So when you've just got one page, it's not as easy to see what's going on here as it is when you have multiple pages. So if we were to come in here, here's just something that is kind of hacked together. We've got a few different divs going on. We've got some different colors happening, those kinds of things. You can take a look at that. Notice we've got some pictures with some spacing around them, and we'll get into those a little bit later. Notice how these are kind of offset or kind of tilted. We'll look at some of that CSS here in a little bit. But everything is orange. All the pages are orange. If I decided I don't really like orange, I want to do something different, I can come into the style sheet. And this is actually in the content div. I can make it pink. Now when I go back to the web page and I refresh, it's pink. All the pages now are pink. So by making that one change in one file, it affects everything. Makes it so much easier for updating and those kinds of things when you're looking at multiple sites. I'm going to set that back. One other thing to notice in the style sheet is when you want to comment something, you do a / asterisk and then a space, at least one space, and then you can make your comment. You need to close your comment with a asterisk /. If this was not there, then the whole thing is commented out. So if you're using Notepad, it turns it green. It's kind of easy to see. If you weren't using something like this formatting just simply wouldn't be applied. So you'd know that you might have some kind of a problem with commenting. So make sure you open and close a comment. Here, the spreadsheet or the style sheet, it's fairly heavily commented, just from a learning perspective to help you out. Also, it just makes it so much easier when you come back and visit this thing 6 months later to remember what all the different divs were used for and all that kind of stuff. Also, one thing that's kind of nice at the top of the style sheet here, all of the colors that I was using on the page. So this orange, this particular blue color, this green color, this kind of blue-green color out here, all of those, I've made a comment in the style sheet, and I've listed them up here and what kind of a description of what color, where they are used and those kinds of things. Now I can refer back to those if something gets changed or if I need to add to the style sheet and I want it to be that same orange. I don't have to go hunting quite as much. It's up there. So comments are your friends in style sheets here. You probably want to make sure you have several comments in there to make it a little easier to understand. Now those tilted pictures that we talked about. So we're formatting things on the left or the right. I've named this Polaroid just because it kind of looks like the old school Polaroid pictures. This picture, if we get in and we look at let's see, we're on the Oxeye Daisy here. If we get in and we look at the Oxeye Daisy, we can see that we created a div, and we called that div Polaroid Left, and then we stuck a picture in there, and then we've added the alt and the title so that the tooltips and the hovering pop-ups and those kinds of things will work. Giving that div this particular class, this particular CSS class, I can come in here and look, and it was Polaroid Left. So we're going to float left, which means we're going to push the picture to the left of the text. Background color is going to be white. Here's the particular width. We've got some padding and margins around there, and we'll look at those a little bit more in detail when we talk about the box model. Here's the piece that's kind of interesting. These rotates here, this is what's causing the pictures to kind of tilt left or tilt right, depending on whether they're on the left side or the right side of the page. So this one's tilting left. Here's one going left, one going right. Here's the little bit of CSS to do that. Now the interesting thing is this CSS that causes this tilt, it's specific to Mozilla. So if you're using Firefox, they'll show up tilted. Let's see what happens if we're using Chrome. Chrome, it also shows up tilted, but we got some funky edges going on around the picture here that might cause us some problems. What if we're using Internet Explorer? They don't show up tilted at all. That's ignored. So it's one thing to keep in mind when you're using the CSS is this cross-browser compatibility. So just because it appears this particular way in one browser doesn't mean it will appear that way in the other. And you think about, we have several different versions of Firefox that are being used right now, several different versions of Internet Explorer, several different versions of Safari, Chrome, all those kinds of things. Then you throw in all the mobile browsing and those different browsers. It gets kind of crazy. So what we're probably doing is, if we're doing this for a company, we're building to the standard browser for the company. So if maybe they only support Internet Explorer, so everything can be built around Internet Explorer, you don't have to worry about the cross-browser compatibility so much. You might have to worry about versions. But if we're doing something like an Amazon or some kind of a web forum or something where lots of people are going to be coming with lots of different browsers and hardware, we have to really worry about this cross-browser compatibility. So in some of the other classes, we'll talk about virtual machines and how you can have virtual machines set up with different browsers and those kinds of things, different versions of browsers, so that you can test your pages and see what they look like. So that's important to keep in mind when we're looking at these.